My friend Christy and I are passionate about Enneagram and Yoga. In fact, we love these two pathways of transformation so much, we're both certified as teachers in Enneagram and Yoga. We're here at TEDx to share with you about these two powerful ways of transformation.
So let me start by telling you a little bit about the Enneagram. The Enneagram personality typing system is inviting us to more readily understand our persona, to understand who we are. But the Enneagram doesn't stop there. It invites us to look at all 9 types so that we can better relate to other people and even integrate the strengths of these other types of people into our own being so that we can become more whole, so that we can transform as well. So you've probably heard of the Sufi mystic Rumi. He said, "The beauty you see in me is a reflection of you." And the Enneagram is helping us to look at that beauty inside of ourselves, to identify our strengths, not only so that we can understand ourselves and love ourselves, but so that we can see the strengths and beauty in one another, even in those others who are very different than we are. And likewise, the Enneagram helps us to understand our shadow side. We all have those parts of us that are our growing edges that we have to work on. And when we start to become more aware of those parts of ourselves and befriend those parts of ourselves, it's also much easier to accept the limitations of other people. And when I was in high school, my dad struggled with sex and alcohol addiction. In fact, his addiction was so profound, he hit rock bottom, he lost his job, he went to rehab, and luckily he went on to find sobriety. But unfortunately, his problems led me as a young teen to have a lot of shame. This feeling that my family didn't measure up, that I was not enough. And what I did with that shame is I tried to prove myself through being the consummate helper in my family, but also in the world. So I'm so grateful that I found the Enneagram, because the Enneagram has led me to look inward and realize I can't always be over-functioning and helping others. I've got to practice self-care. I've got to find boundaries.
So Christy just shared with you some information about the Enneagram, and I want to talk to you about yoga. While Enneagram allows us to recognize our gifts and growing edges, yoga invites us to somatically tune in into our strengths and weaknesses. It also teaches us to recognize the inner work that we need to do. Word yoga comes from Sanskrit, language from India, and it simply means to yoke. So yoga invites us to yoke or to connect. In yoga, we connect breath to movement, but like the Enneagram, we also connect to a deeper part of ourselves. We all have hardships that we go through in life, and oftentimes these difficulties can change trajectory of our life. For me, most defining moments have been immigrating to the United States of America by myself at age 15, losing both of my parents to colon cancer during both of my pregnancies, and having my son being diagnosed with a serious and extremely rare genetic disorder when he was only 8 months old. And even though yoga came into my life after most of these events, to this day, my yoga practice helps me to heal my grief and my sorrow. And for that reason, and many more, I cannot envision my life without yoga. So today, Christy and I will share with you about all the 9 personality types, but also we will teach and show you a yoga pose that we believe each Enneagram type can benefit from practicing in order to grow emotionally and spiritually. And since the Enneagram is divided in triads, we will start with type 8, and Christy will share the even numbers with you because she is steady and even, and I will tell you all about the odd ones because I tend to be an oddball.
The triad that the type 8 falls into is the anger or the gut triad. And the type 8 is sometimes called the boss or the challenger. And this type is a leader. And they are intense, they are protective, they tend to be an advocate for justice in the world. They are strong, and they can sometimes be accused of being controlling. So what does this type fear? This type fears weakness and vulnerability. They struggle with getting in touch with their softer side. Their shadow side is lust. Their lust is usually for power and control. And so when we're thinking about a yoga pose that would really benefit the type 8, because they need to rest, they need vulnerability, and they need to deepen their empathy, we love seated cat-cows for the type 8. So you can see Kat is opening her heart space and then bringing her chin to her chest and finding that internal space, which is so healthy for the type 8 because that moves them beyond their tough exterior to find their heart space, to find vulnerability, to go inside themselves.
Type 9 is also in the anger and the gut triad. And while the 8s outwardly express their anger, 9s tend to push it down. Type 9 is known as peacemaker or mediator, and they are agreeable, easygoing, loving, sometimes people-pleasing and passive-aggressive. They struggle with speaking up, finding their voice, and they tend to avoid conflict. Their shadow side is sloth, and they need to work on taking action. The pose that we want to offer to type 9 is peaceful warrior. And this is the pose that can remind type 9 that they still can be peaceful and find their inner warrior. This is a strong, engaging pose, and it allows type 9 to feel energized and confident and show up for their life. The last type in the gut and the anger triad is my personality type, type 1. And type 1 is known as a reformer or the perfectionist. We care about order, being right, or doing things the right way. We care about organization, principles, morals, and just like 8s, we have been accused of being tad bit controlling. We're fearful of being seen as bad, corrupt, or evil, and we show our shadow side of anger as resentment and high expectations. And since 1s tend to be overly serious and responsible, we think a palm tree is an excellent pose for them to practice. So as type 1 practices the palm tree, they are letting go. They feel playful, and they elicit peace.
So let's move on to my type, the type 2. And when we move to the type 2, we're moving to a whole new triad. So we're moving to the heart or the shame triad. So the type 2, like I said earlier, is known as the giver or the helper. And this type is caring, they are relational, they are empathetic, they're very, very generous, but they can be people pleasers and we can be manipulative. And so this type tends to really fear whether other people like them. In fact, they fear that so much that that can wake them up in the middle of the night just thinking about whether a friend is mad at them. And that's why they're perpetually out in the world trying to love and to serve so that they will be loved and liked in return. Now, the shadow side for the type 2 is pride. And how this pride shows up in the life of the two is they are this saintly and sacrificial martyr, maybe a Mother Teresa type in a way. And so what this type needs is humility. They need to learn to humble themselves, to take care of themselves, to look at their own needs, to practice boundaries and self-care. And so the yoga pose that is fantastic for our type is seated child's pose. So you can see that Kat is bringing her chest towards her thighs, and she's finding introspection. She's finding rest. She's humbling herself. She's finding that self-care and self-nurture that helps the two to thrive when they find balance between giving and receiving.
Let's move on to type 3, the achiever. And just like Olympians, this type is always setting new goals and going for the gold. This type is ambitious, efficient, hardworking, status conscious, and very successful. As a matter of fact, they fear failure or feeling worthless, and their shadow side is deceit. And that doesn't necessarily mean that they're purposefully dishonest. What it oftentimes means is they deceive themselves by not realizing the impact their constant doing and focus on image has on the relationships with themselves and others. We want to offer mountain pose for type 3. And this is a pose that can remind them that they're human beings and not human doings. They're able to get grounded and have a moment to experience their feelings, to get connected to their deeper and truer self, and to show up in the world.
So the next pose is the type 4, and the type 4 is often called the romantic or the individualist. And what you need to know about this type is they are creative, deep, philosophical, they are empaths. But one thing they can get stuck in is negativity, and this negativity can lead them to withdraw from life. It can lead them to feeling like they are a victim. And what they fear is not being unique or not having significance in the world. Their shadow side is envy, and how this shows up for the type 4 is they tend to compare themselves or their lives with others. This envy can also lead them to be competitive. And as we think about the opposite of envy, that might be gratitude. And so for the type 4, what they need is to find balance between the pain of life and the joy of life. And because of that, breath of joy is a great yoga pose for the type 4. And Kat is going to model this yoga pose for you. And so as you see Kat do this pose, you can tell that it's a really activating pose. It also, when you do it, it just embodies this feeling of joy. And that is what the Enneagram 4 needs. They need to move towards life and learn that they can get back out there and do the hard things in life, but they also need to find that joy, that life's not just the hard things. There's also lots to be grateful for.
Now let's talk about head or anxiety triad. The first one up in this triad is type 5, that is known as an observer or investigator. And that type is cerebral, introverted, knowledgeable, curious, and they also have really strong sense of boundaries. They're afraid of being seen as worthless and incapable, and their shadow side is avarice. And that means that they tend to be stingy with their resources, time, knowledge, and affection. We want to offer a goddess pose for the type 5, and that is a really strong, energetic pose. And that would allow type 5 to tune into their physical body, to take up space, and open their heart to others in the world.
So now we're moving on. The type 6 is known as the team player or the loyal skeptic. And so as their name suggests, this is a very loyal type. They are cooperative. They are really good at cultivating places where other people can belong. They're very faithful to organizations that they are a part of. But this type can struggle with trusting others and also with anxiety. And so for this type, what they fear most of all is stability and security. They want that deeply in their lives, but they're afraid that they're not going to have it. So what do? They tend to catastrophize. They tend to imagine worst case scenarios. And so their shadow side is anxiety. And because of that, what they need more than anything is courage and faith and hope. And so what we have suggested for the type 6 is airplane pose, because this helps bring their heart forward to shine in the world, to find adventure, to find courage, to find their flight in life.
The last Enneagram type we want to talk about is type 7. And just because they're last, they're certainly not least. In fact, Enneagram would argue that there's not one type that is better than the other. Type 7 is known as the enthusiast and optimist. And this type is fun, extroverted, spontaneous, spirited, visionary. There also can be a little overextended and scattered. They are fearful of experience emotional pain and being bored. And their shadow side is gluttony, so they numb their suffering by endless experiences and activities. The yoga pose we want to offer to type 7 is seated figure 4. And that is the pose that literally allows them to pause and then to get grounded to the earth. But not so even that. What they are able to do is experience the hip opener, which lets them feel and release their pain.
Both the Enneagram and yoga are pathways to looking inside yourself and finding your strength and your weaknesses and starting to dance with those different parts of yourself. And ultimately, I want to say that the Enneagram and yoga are about compassion. And boy, do we need more of that in our world right now. And so I hope that you might be a little bit more interested in learning about these two introspective practices. They've been so meaningful in Kat and I's life, and I think that they could really benefit you as well. Thank you.
Thank you.